don't you start a little bit and talk a little bit more about yourself and what it is that you do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. So I wish I could see all your hands because I would love to know, and maybe you can just, think about this for yourself, but I would love to know, what's your favorite food? What do you love to eat? For me, I love a lot of food, but I love ripe Palisade peaches in the summer, in the late summer. I love apples. I love burgers. I love corn, sweet corn. How many of you love those things and other things? That's what got me into this work, is loving food, loving agriculture, loving the work that it takes to grow and raise our food. So what I do every day is really different depending on what day it is. But again, it might be going out to a farmer ranch and meeting with farmers, talking about what their lives are like. It might be sharing a meal with a legislator, someone who writes policy and makes decisions for us and what our state looks like as we move into the future. It might be meeting with someone who's got a problem that we need to help solve. And that's a lot of what we do every day at our Department of Agriculture, is help producers, help farmers and ranchers solve problems. Make sure that we're getting food onto your tables, because that's really the bottom line, is keeping people fed and keeping agriculture alive and well. So that's really my focus in a nutshell. And we have almost 39,000 farms and ranches in the state of Colorado, if you can imagine that. And that's in every single county. It's in the eastern plains, on the western slope, in the mountains, out in the grasslands. Every river, every stream touches agriculture in one way or another. And we are here to support and serve all who work and live in agriculture in Colorado.
Great. Kate has a super big job, or super important job to Colorado agriculture, and is essential in making everything work and happen. Let's get into our book. First off, we need to make sure we thank our sponsors. You all should have, or your class should have received a copy of the book, is that right? But we need to make sure that we thank these sponsors that have allowed us to do this project and to send these books to you. So we had a grant through the Bessie Minor Swift Foundation, and it was on behalf of the Fence Post Ag News, one of our major ag media sources here in Colorado and in the surrounding states. And actually, the author of the book, Rachel Gable, works for the Fence Post, and the gal Liz, who did all the beautiful illustrations that you'll see in a minute, she also works for the Fence Post. And then we had the Farm Bureau Women's Leadership Committee, the Colorado Cattlewomen, Bank of Colorado, and then other sponsors. So our story today is called Still Good, The Faces of Family Agriculture, and it actually features Colorado farmers and ranchers. So in this story, we're going to hear about a little boy who finds his grandpa's photo album. Have any of you all looked at old photos? Seen old photo albums that maybe your grandparents or your parents have? Raise your hand if you've seen some of those old photos. Yeah, many of you have. And that's what this little boy found. And we'll see the pictures are some of these old photos. And you'll see they're a little worn. The corners might be a little rough. Many of them are in black and white, because that's just the way photography was back then. And as the boy is looking through the photo album, his grandpa is telling him stories about these photos. And then the boy has a great idea to see how agriculture is produced today. And so through this story, we're going to compare these two eras of agriculture, back in the 1950s and then today. So I want you to think about how things were done 70 years ago versus how they're done today. Okay, let's get started.
All right, everyone, jumping in. The leather photo album creaked as the boy opened it, sending dust swirling into the light from the attic window. Out in the yard, he could see cattle milling around the pens and the rows of corn dancing in the wind. He flipped to a yellowing page with a black and white photo. Below it, someone had neatly written, "The Boys and Patsy, 1950. He turned to another photo and another before deciding he needed to know more. He knew exactly who would know more. He opened the screen door to the farmhouse and it groaned. He stepped on the porch and the old dog and the old boards groaned. A quilt flapped in the breeze on the clothesline. The boy sat down on the porch swing beside his grandfather, who was oiling a shovel handle. He looked over and saw the book in the boy's lap. "I haven't seen that book for a while," Grandpa said. "Farming sure is different now than it was." The boy opened the book to the photo of the boys and the milk cow. The older boy was hunkered on a little stool, milking a cow. The younger boy had his thumbs hooked in the straps of his overalls, a dog near his feet. "Old Patsy," Grandpa said, pulling the book and the boy closer. "We always had a milk cow around. She was a shorthorn. I used to weigh every bucket of milk to fill 10-gallon cans. We would sell those cans and my dad would give me a few cents from the milk check. That was back when even a few cents could buy something." The boy turned the page to a photo of a long-legged boy standing next to a man with a weathered hat in front of an old tractor. Grandpa looked at the photo and leaned back in his chair. "That old tractor could really run," he said. "It was hot on that metal seat in the summer, and there was no heat when it was cold. That tractor is still out in the barn. Maybe I'll teach you to drive it sometime. They could sure build things to last." The next photo was of a young boy standing proudly next to a steer. Grandpa studied the photo and sat back in his chair, tipping his straw hat back on his head and taking a long drink of tea. At his feet, the dog sighed. "That boy, not much older than you, was me," he said. "I took that Hereford steer to the fair and won a blue ribbon. That fall, I led that steer down the alley at the Denver Union stockyards. The buyers would all sit on the wooden fence rails that lined the alleys. I stood up straight and led that steer, hoping those buyers would bid. I couldn't understand the auctioneer's chant. That's what it's called when they talk so quickly. They sure seem to." Grandpa turned another page to a photo of a young woman in a dress behind rows of pumpkins with baskets filled with apples, zucchinis, potatoes, onions, watermelons, and peppers. "This is your grandma when she was young," he said. "Her dad farmed, and it took him and the boys all summer to irrigate the produce. It was like watering our garden, but they did it for entire fields. Each morning, your grandma would drive the old pickup to the farm stand where she would sell the produce they grew. That's where I met her. I ate a lot of vegetables that summer, looking for excuses to see her." He paused and smiled at the photo. "This was back when farmers irrigated with shovels and set tubes by hand," he said. "There were no pivot sprinklers. It was back when irrigating was a full-time job all by itself. You couldn't buy fruits and vegetables anytime you wanted. They were available when they were in season, and people stored them in root cellars or put them up in a glass canning jar like Grandma does with her dilled green beans and jellies." The boy smiled at the mention of Grandma's jars of green beans. They were his favorite. He turned the page. The photo was of a young man trailing sheep through a small town. A horse pulled a round-topped herder's wagon behind the ewes, and dogs and kids on horseback were on all sides. "That family has been raising sheep near Meeker for nearly 100 years, he said. "They took them high in the summer and brought them back down in the fall. Herders stayed with the sheep and protected them from bears, wolves, and mountain lions, and kept them together and safe. It takes a lot of work to raise lambs, but I'm glad people still do it. The boy thought about wool socks in the winter and Grandma's lamb chops at Easter. Me too, said the boy. We've bought a lamb from them every year as long as I can remember, Grandpa said. We always knew where our meat came from, raised either on our farm or a neighbor's. When this photo was taken, there weren't refrigerated trucks to haul meat across the country. The next photo was a handsome young man standing beside a small airplane. Who is that, Grandpa? Well, son, that's me, he said. You were a pilot? The boy was sitting up straight now, eager to hear more. Grandpa scratched the dog that was now inching closer to him in search of a cool breeze. Yep, he said. You know how the yellow airplanes spray the neighbors' fields? The boy nodded. Well, I used to do that, he said. I'd fly low, buzzing the fields for the farmers who had hired me. I learned to fly in the war, so when I came home, I figured out a way to get back in the air. It was dangerous, and it still is, but it was a thrill and an important job. When I flew near our farm, I would waggle my wings back and forth to say hello to your grandma. As summer turned to fall, the boy returned to school, though he thought he would learn more on the porch with Grandpa and helping water the garden and fixing the old tractor and checking the cows than he did at a desk. The boy had asked to borrow the leather book and had carried it home carefully, protecting it like it contained treasures and knowing it did indeed. As he stepped into his own house, he had an idea. After school, the boy did his chores, ate dinner, then sat at the kitchen table, nearly writing letters and folding them into envelopes, which he put in the mailbox at the end of the drive as he waited for the bus. Each day, he hustled off the school bus and checked the mailbox. He flipped through bills and catalogs for seed, bulls, and tractors. Finally, one day, there was an envelope with his name on it. 5 more envelopes slowly arrived, and he sat at the kitchen table with the leather book open and worked as his mother moved about the kitchen as the ag news played on the television. It was Friday when he carried the leather album down the driveway to his grandpa's porch. A quilt was drying on the line, dancing as the wind blew it. The dog and the old man stood and watched the boy run toward them. He bounded up the stairs and held the leather book out to his grandpa. Take a look, he told Grandpa, his heart beating fast from running and anticipation. Grandpa opened the book and saw, again, the photo of 2 boys and a roan milk cow. On the facing page, the boy had carefully placed a color photo of Holstein cows in a spotless milking barn. The stainless steel gleamed and 2 men walked alongside the cows, ensuring that the robotic milker cups attached correctly. Well, I'll be, Grandpa said, studying the photo. Where did you find this? I wrote a letter to the family who owns Chapin Family Dairies, asking for a photo of them milking cows, he said. Mr. Chapin told me the robots milk the cows and test the milk, and they are able to safely milk more cows and make sure the milk is clean and the cows feel good. It only takes a few people to milk a lot of cows. Robots? I'll be darned, Grandpa said. They even have a robot to push the feed close to the cows so it's always there and fresh, and big tanker trucks pick up milk every day, the boy said. Dairy farming is different now than it was when you milked Patsy, but it's still good. Grandpa turned the page to the photo of the long-legged boy standing by the tractor. On the facing page were 2 men, father and son, in front of a combine and tractor hooked to a disc. Behind them, Grandpa could see a center pivot sprinkler against the blue sky. That is Mark Arnouche and his dad, the boy said. They came from Germany to grow sugar beets in 1951, but now they grow wheat and they have the third generation working with them too. Grandpa held the book close, studying the modern combine and tractor, and he smiled when he looked back at the black and white photo, remembering the little red tractor. Much different than we had then, he said. Different, but still good. The next page was the photo of Grandpa as a boy and his Hereford steer. Next to it, the boy had taped a photo of an auctioneer in a crisp shirt and an evenly creased hat, leaning close to a microphone with his hand pointing to the crowd, calling bids. In the ring was a fancy set of Hereford heifers. Next to the auctioneer sat two people with cell phones and computer screens in front of them. Miss Robin at Livestock Exchange sent me this photo when I wrote to her, the boy said. He pointed to the computer. That's how people at home can buy cattle on their computer or phone, he said. Grandpa grinned and said he had never heard of such a thing. They still chant and take bids, and Miss Robin said they still serve cherry pie, and it's really good, the boy said. Grandpa smiled when he turned the page to the photo of Grandma as a girl. Next to it was a photo of a young woman in shorts and a t-shirt, leaning on a crate of cantaloupes. Mrs. Gail Knapp sent me this photo, the boy said. They've been selling produce at their farm stand for over 30 years. Their melons are trucked to grocery stores in several states because they produce more than they can sell at their stand. And not everyone who wants to buy their produce can come to their farm. They have Rocky Ford cantaloupes and watermelon, peppers that tumble in the roaster over a flame, sweet corn, okra, onions, potatoes, peaches, and jars of apple butter. Mrs. Knapp said the apple butter they sell is made exactly to my grandma's famous recipe, and it's the best around. They both knew that was one of the things that hadn't changed and was still good. On the last page was the photo of the sheep trotting toward town. On the facing page was a new color photo of a young boy following the sheep through the same small town. That is Ari Theos, the boy said. He is the 5th generation of sheep producers on their ranch. They still trail ewes like they did when his grandpa was his age. Some things change only a little and are still good. Grandpa smiled and sat back in his chair, with the leather book closed on his lap. Together, the two looked over the farm and thought of the farms just beyond their view, with pivot irrigation, big tractors, and the setting sun, knowing it was different, but still good. The end.
Yay, thank you, Kate. Students, what did you think of that book? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Thumbs up, good job. We have time for a few questions. Does anyone have any questions about the book or questions for Kate? Or questions about agriculture at all? Do we have a question there in Ms. Ritter's class?
We do. We were working on, sometimes we think a question is a story, so we were having a short discussion about what's a question. I have a student that has, Weston, what's your question?
What are all
The different equipment you use on the farm. What's different equipment you use on a farm?
Yeah, the story talked a lot about how equipment has changed over time, right? Remember the red tractor from the 50s that the grandpa was talking about? And then the new tractor that the boy was talking about from now? And maybe it's hard to see in the pictures, but you know, they're different sizes, they do different things. Does anybody remember what the grandpa was saying about the seat in his old tractor? When he sits on that tractor seat in the summer, what does it feel like?
What is it?
It was hot. Does anybody remember the other thing the grandpa said about the older tractor in the winter?
The seat was very cold.
That's right. And that's because the old tractor was all exposed to the weather. So no matter rain or shine or snow or heat, farmers were out in the weather. And now in tractors today, they get to be inside, and they can also cover a lot more ground, and they use computers to know where they're going and how much they're irrigating and different spots on their land. So the technology has really changed, and hopefully it also means the farmers can stay cool in the summer now that they have the tractors with more technology.
Our school, I don't know if you know where we're at. We're in Sweet, Colorado, so we're 5 miles east of Rocky Ford. So our school is surrounded by farm ground. We see lots of irrigation in the summer, and we know Knapp's produce, and one of our teachers actually works there in the summer, so it was very cool for us to see that in that story. So
I was surrounded with all kinds of crops, and my mom thinks she's kind of allergic to
Oh, yeah. Weston is saying his home is surrounded by lots of crops as well. Kate, do you have a question?
Yes. Does it really matter if you're what happens if your tire is flat and you're stuck also?
Oh, like if the tire is flat
Yeah.
and you're stuck?
Like in the mud.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
Good question. That's something that happens with cars, and it can happen with tractors too. So the first thing, you want to do your best to not get stuck if you can. So farmers are always watching the weather and looking at their soil and thinking about the right time to be out in the field to avoid getting stuck. But if something happens and they get stuck, or a tire goes flat, they're going to have to deal with it. They're going to have to either fix it themselves or call a friend or family member or neighbor for help. Just like if you were stuck on the side of the road, sometimes we can fix our own. Sometimes we need to call in somebody who can help us.
Great questions. Any other questions from either of our two classrooms? Or if you want to put it in the chat to some of our other participants here.
No, we're going to let someone else go. Jonah? We need to let another class have a turn. We're not the only class on.
So any questions in our other class? Otherwise, I have a question for you. All right, I'm going to ask a question then. So what did you notice about how cows were milked differently from when Grandpa was milking cows to how they're milked at Chapin Family Dairies?
What do you know, Weston? Does anybody else know? Weston's had a chance to answer. Emily, do you remember how the cow was milked and how Grandpa milked it, and then the picture that the boy showed him later?
Okay, you.
So the people make machines that milk the cow?
Did you hear Caleb? Caleb,
I didn't hear it.
Okay.
Yeah, they use machines now, which is a lot different than going out every morning and every night and hand milking cows every day.
Very cool. How about if you wanted to buy Colorado produce or Colorado products, agriculture products, fruits, vegetables, whatever that were grown or that were made in Colorado, how would you do? How would you know? What would you look for? Kate, maybe you have to answer that one.
Well, I know someone in one of the classrooms just mentioned that they are surrounded by farms and ranches and maybe even see melons or watermelons on the side of the road at farm stands. Do you think those melons were grown nearby? You can shake your head if you think so, or thumbs up. What if you see a farmer or a rancher standing out with chili peppers? Do you think maybe they grew the chili peppers? Maybe. And what about if you go to a market, like a farmer's market or somewhere where there's a lot of produce or meat or milk that, you know, or cheese that farmers are selling? Do you think maybe that came from Colorado? Thumbs up, maybe. Those are all ways to meet farmers and ranchers and to learn about what they grow and ask them where they're from and where their produce or meat came from. Because here in Colorado, we grow and raise so many kinds of foods, so many kinds, from beef and lamb and pork to peppers and fruits and vegetables and grains and all kinds of things that go into what we eat every single day.
That's right. And there's a specific label that you can also look for called the Colorado Proud label. And that way you know that those products are from Colorado. And the folks at the Department of Agriculture, where Kate works, are in charge of running that program. So be sure to look for that little label that says Colorado Proud. Okay, we're pretty much out of time. Did anyone have any last questions? Looks like one.
We think we're good with questions, but my class would like to tell, what do you tell them for reading us the story?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. It was so fun reading with you.
Thank you all for participating, and thanks to Commissioner Greenberg for her time and for our 2 classes. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you have a great rest of the week and rest of your day and enjoy some of those great Colorado agriculture products.